folk filmmaking 10 years in the future? This is a question that might date this video the minute I put it out. But I saw a Reddit post from one of the folk filmmakers. There's a folk filmmaking Reddit that you can check out. And it was basically positing like 20, 30 years from now, like what folk filmmaking might be like. Will it exist? Will it not exist? What will we see? And as the guy who kind of coined the term, I thought it would be interesting just to give you my 2 cents on what I expect to see going forward. The first thing I think is building infrastructure. My hope is that by 5-10 years from now, that the infrastructure of folk filmmaking will be much more there. Right now, it's built between me and a few other creators who are all making these works. There's probably like about 25, 50 to 100 of us in that range that are aware of folk filmmaking and putting out consistent content that is in that realm. The goal, I think, is to diversify, to get as many people and as many ranges of opinions and beliefs behind the folk filmmaking banner of releasing on YouTube. One thing that I've been really thinking about lately is just trying to get more people with different ranges of voices to make folk films. Actually, one thing that I just realized, and I didn't even notice until I was like, because I catalog all these films and watch them, I don't think there's a single female folk filmmaker director that's in the folk filmmaking movement. I don't know if that's by happenstance or what, but I've looked for some, and maybe there are some films that are out there. I would love if someone could send me a couple folk films directed by some female directors. I think that would be a cool way to diversify and get different voices on the playlist. But I think in order for this movement to keep going, we need to build the infrastructure. We need to build up the playlist. We need to build up different avenues in which we can communicate. A good example, the Reddit is a great place to put out the films. Another great place is like Facebook. We have a Facebook group and Twitter as well. If we build as many platforms out with folk filmmakers, it's going to be a lot harder to either take us down or keep the discussion limited to one area. For example, the Reddit, I don't even really communicate on the Reddit that often. And it's been completely run by new and different people. So that's what's awesome, is that it's definitely building outward and it's starting to take a life of its own. So I think infrastructure is one big thing that I see coming forward and one thing that I really am excited to see going forward. The second thing would be building bigger in terms of our films. I think right now we're seeing a lot of interesting small, contained, either dramas or naturalistic films. With the exceptions of a few, I think most of the films in the folk filmmaking movement are things that I think a lot of people can do pretty easily. And that's awesome, I love that. But I really want to start seeing sort of an expansion of that idea. A good example would be like Doomed Productions' Video Carnage. That is a film that I don't think just anyone could make, and I think that the distribution platform of YouTube just fits with it so nicely. Another great example would be my own film, The Long Con. I don't think The Long Con, despite it having some things that I disagree about how I made it and put it out, I made a whole video on it. But I think what's cool about The Long Con is that it was a much bigger and grander film for the folk filmmaking movement. It's definitely the most grand movie that I've made so far. And I think I would love to see more elaborate and unique films. The third thing I would love to see is some sort of collaborations with bigger artists. Trying to bring in artists that are either on the YouTube sphere or even maybe named actors would be a cool idea to bring into folk filmmaking at some level. I don't know if that will ever happen, but I think that in 10 years, if some of us have built a name, especially people like Joel Haver, I think it might be cool to see if we can get some other maybe bigger voices to shout out and or work on some of these films. I think that there's a lot of creative and talented people who would get behind the folk filmmaking ethos. And I think that we need one of those type of people in the next 5 to 10 years to help grow the movement and to build upon it. If it doesn't happen, I don't think it's going to be a huge issue, but it would be cool to see if there's maybe one fed up Hollywood actor that just decides to quit the unions and come work with us scrubs on a movie. I think it could happen, and it's something that is very tantalizing to think about if you kind of think about it a little bit. And to wrap it up, I think that ultimately my goal is just to see more films. I think what's great about folk filmmaking is it releases you from this prison of like, you need to release one film once a year or one film every couple years. It allows you to be very creative and get as many projects out as possible. And I know a lot of people are critical of that, but for me, I think that that's one of the most awesome assets about folk filmmaking is that you can make creative stuff at breakneck pace that Hollywood can't compete with you. They can't really compete with the output that you're putting out from one director. Most Hollywood directors can only direct one film every couple of years, but you on the folk filmmaking platform can do that as many times as you want. I'm doing the 12 Features project just to prove that it's very easy to do this. And my hope is that by the end of this, it will teach everyone else that, hey, this is easy to do, this is going to be successful, and it allows you to be more free to create what you want. One example of one thing I want to try to do is a TV show. I've been thinking about doing a crime TV show that would probably incorporate some of the Coleraine cinematic universe into it, and maybe make like a couple episodes of TV. Try to use the YouTube platform in a unique and different way that hasn't really been used before. So that's kind of what I'm hoping for with the folk filmmaking movement going forward. I think that ultimately we're going to see a lot of different voices coming out. We're going to see innovation, and my hope is that things will get better, that we'll find a way for people to make money, to make art, and to inspire voices. And I think that the question I ask to you is, where do you see folk filmmaking in 10 years? Do you think it will still be a thing? Do you think it will be something that will have grown from then? Or do you think it will be in the dust? Obviously there's some haters watching, so I gotta bait them into comments. But overall, what's your thoughts? I had a fun time making this video. This is really relaxing by this pool right here, so have a good one. That was a crappy outro.